Now it's time for some post-processing effects. Let's head over to the asset store and let's type in Unity. What we're looking for are the post-processing effects created by Unity Technologies. Go ahead and click on their name, their author profile. You can also actually type in here post-process. And you'll see here by Unity Essentials, Unity Technologies, post-processing. Let's go ahead and import this. And similar to how we set up things in game 1, we're going to go ahead and take it a step further. We're going to go ahead and turn this game into a commercial quality game. As of right now, it looks pretty good, but just wait until you see what post-processing can do. So while that's importing, let's go ahead and prepare to dive in to post-processing. We're going to be looking at ambient occlusion, depth of field, we're going to get involved with color grading, chromatic aberration, we're going to look at the vignette settings, and then we're also going to go even further with lighting. We're going to go ahead and check out different rendering options and how that's drastically going to improve the quality of our scene. So I'll see you when you get these assets imported. Okay, so once you have the assets imported, you should have a folder called post-processing. And what we want to do here is open up our game view, and we can go ahead and right-click, create, and we'll go ahead and create a post-processing file. So to do that, you're going to click on post-processing file, and let's go ahead and name this, we'll call it sci-fi file, or post-processing file, PPF. Alright, here's our sci-fi post-processing file. We need to select our player, we need to go to the main camera, and we need to add this post-processing file. So add component, post-processing behavior, and drag your file onto it. Okay, let's go ahead and click on your profile. And let's go ahead and start drastically converting this scene into something amazing. The first thing I want to do is I want to change our color space for our lighting. Right now, we are in a gamma setting. What I want to do is change it to a linear rendering path so that as light intensity increases, we can avoid getting any sort of washed out look on our materials. So go to Edit, Project Settings, Player. Under Other Settings, there is a color space here, currently set to gamma. I want to change that to linear. Now this is going to take several minutes to compile, but essentially what's going to happen here is as we increase the light intensity on gamma, things will become sort of just pure white and washed out, versus with a linear rendering path, it's going to give it a more realistic approach to light intensity, and will avoid getting that washed out look. So once this is compiled, you may notice a subtle scene difference. You might not, it's okay. But just remember that this is going to prevent any sort of washed out look when we get into creating our actual post-processing effects. So as soon as this is done, I will see you then, and we'll continue on with our PPF file. Okay, so now that that's finished, you may have noticed, like I said before, a subtle difference in your scene. It might actually already look a little bit better. So what do we want to do now? We want to go ahead and actually start increasing the quality of this scene through our post-processing file. Now it's important to know that this post-processing file is only going to affect the image on our main camera. So on our weapon cam, we're actually not going to be affecting our weapon through post-processing. We're going to have to create another post-processing profile specific for the weapon, which we'll do next. So let's get started here. Go ahead and click on your sci-fi post-processing file. And we're going to go ahead and start from the top. We always want to leave fog on. It's just a basic default setting. The next thing we want to do is enable anti-aliasing. Anti-aliasing is basically going to smooth out hard edges. So we definitely want this on. The next thing we have here is ambient occlusion. And ambient occlusion basically creates depth. It keeps everything from looking flat. So let's go ahead and enable this. And you'll see here that it sort of adds a shadow layer just to create a depth and avoid the flatness. What we can do is we can actually increase the intensity of this, and you'll be able to see here that the hard surface shadows will come out. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and mess around with this, set it to about 0.75, and the radius you can tone up or down based on your choosing. So I'm going to go ahead and make this about keep this about 1, and I'll keep my radius at about 0.78 I'm happy with. Let's go ahead and move on to depth of field. And depth of field is how far you want to be able to focus. So check this out. When we turn on depth of field, we have a focus distance. So I'm going to go ahead and set this focus distance to about 1. And you'll see here that everything gets super blurry and we can only focus one, you can think of it as one unit in front of us. From there, I'm going to keep my focus distance at 1 and I'm going to change my aperture, which is our f-stop. The f-stop basically creates a super sharp image the higher the value. So watch what happens as I increase this. You'll see here that my shark is blurry, but now I have a crisp, clear focus on the shark. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this at about 10.9 I'm happy with. Let's go ahead and move on to motion blur. So motion blur is going to basically create motion blur when our camera moves. So I'm going to go ahead and move this down to about 180. And the sample count, you can go ahead and keep it at about 10. This is going to be a pretty good mix. Basically, motion blur is when we're moving, what happens to objects around us. So you'll see here our shutter speed. So as I move around, how is the smoothing between this? So I'm going to go ahead and keep it at about 180 in a simple, with a sample count of 10. Happy with that. Moving on down, we have our bloom setting here. Now, bloom setting is awesome and very attractive. So what we have here is basically light intensity through bloom. So here we have intensity, we can increase it, and you'll see here that the weapon in front of us, as well as the walls and the lighting, gets super bright. And as I increase intensity, I can increase the threshold. And you'll see here that we can control the quality of our scene through that. So if I go and create a high intensity and I give it a negative threshold or 0, it gets super like blurred out like this. So you can create some really awesome environments and scenes through bloom. So let's go ahead and find a value we're comfortable with. So for intensity, I'm going to go ahead and bring it down. And we don't want it super intense, but maybe about 0.3 intensity. And threshold, I'm going to go ahead and make it about, we'll go ahead and say 1.8 or maybe 0.8 for the threshold. I'm happy with that. Now, check this out. I'm going to go ahead and walk up to these weapons here and watch what happens when I actually walk by the bloom setting. You may notice that it's flickering. So if you don't want that flickering effect, if you don't like that, there's an anti-flicker option. If you select that and now look at it, you'll see here that the flickering has stopped. So basically anti-flickering does exactly what it says. It turns off the flickering. So, and you can actually see that in real time on my scene view, that it will disable the flickering. And if you want to, you can increase the intensity just a bit more and control the threshold. Okay, so I am actually pretty happy with 0.3 and about 0.8 on my threshold. And I'm going to turn anti-flicker on. Okay, so next we're going to move on to color grading. Now, color grading is awesome. Basically, it's a way to blend all of your image together. Automatically, just by doing that, you'll see here that it instantly blends all of our colors. So what we want to do now is let's go ahead and change this tone mapper. Right now it's set to neutral. Go ahead and put it on filmic and we'll get sort of like a cinematic look here. And what we can do now is we can actually increase things. Like for instance, let's go ahead and increase the post exposure to increase the light here. And I'm going to go ahead and keep that at about 0.8. And we can increase the temperature. So we're outside. So let's go ahead and get a warmer temperature in here. So I'm going to go ahead and increase it to about, and if you want a cooler one, you're more than welcome to go that way. I'm going to go ahead and give it a temperature of, let's say 13 maybe. A 13 is pretty good. We can add some tint to that. So if you wanted to. So we'll go ahead and create a little bit of tint. I'm going to give it like a 5 on the tint. Now hue shift. Hue shift is very interesting. Hue shift is kind of like psychedelic, or if you wanted to create sort of like an alien planet very quickly, you can create a hue shift. And basically what it does is it just warps your color as a hue color palette here. And as you can see here, we can create some really cool psychedelic looks. Also, if you had some sort of alien environment, you can see where this can come in. So for this type of game, I'm not really interested in that. So I'm going to keep that at 0. Then we have the saturation, and you can adjust the saturation colors between your darks and whites. And I'm going to go ahead and keep that at about 1. And then you have your contrast. So you can increase the contrast between your materials. So for us, I think contrast looks pretty good at, what was the default on that? It was at 1, so I'm going to go and keep it at 1 here. And let's go ahead and increase the, I'm going to decrease that post aperture, I think. You know what? I'm happy with that. So I'm going to keep my post aperture at 0.8. Okay, now we are onto our channel mixers. So these control your red, green, and blues on the color grading. So if you wanted to have more reds or control your reds, your greens individually, you can. We have trackballs that also do the same thing. And if you're familiar with Photoshop tools, you'll see something similar to this. Basically, these are like channels for those colors. Moving on, we have a grading curve, which is really cool. So this grading curve basically controls your lights and your darks. So what I can do with this curve is I can actually create a point by clicking, and what I can do is as I go up, my light colors increase. As I go down, my light colors decrease. So on the bottom left are my light colors, and on the bottom right are my dark colors. So if I bring that down, you'll see it gets dark. If I bring it up, we get light. So what we can do here is we can actually create a curve by double clicking here to get this little node. And we can sort of drag it up to increase our light. And at the same time, I can create another curve to bring down the darks. And you can get some sort of pattern that you want. Now this is affecting the entire scene. If you wanted to, you could affect just the reds in your scene. You can bring the reds out more, or you can bring the reds down more. So this grading curve is a very powerful tool. And what I'm gonna do for it is just do some little simple adjustments here for our lighting, just to kind of give it a bit more of the atmosphere look that I'm looking for. When you're working with the grading curve, what you really want to avoid are hard bends. You don't want any hard overlapping bends. So I'm just going to go ahead, and I think I'm happy with this. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration is a flaw in camera lenses. And what you can see here is basically as I increase this, we get this little like fishbowl type feel. So for my type of game here, I'm really not going to be using this, but if you wanted to, you know, you can add that sort of look like you're looking through like a fishbowl type deal. So I'm going to go ahead, set that back and disable this. We're not going to be using it in this game, but if you want to, you're more than welcome to add that look. We're not going to be working with grain, vignette. So the vignette settings basically adds a shade. It forces the viewer to look straight ahead. Now watch what happens as soon as I enable that. As of right now, we have a lot going on in our scene, but as soon as I add that vignette setting, as the default, you instantly focus in on the center of the screen where the shark is. And that's what the vignette setting is. So here, you can actually increase the intensity and you'll be able to control the lens of it. Now, I think it works beautifully at the default settings, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep that. Okay, and moving on, that is our post-processing for our environment. So if we actually go ahead and run this, and let's go ahead and look around here, I think everything looks pretty awesome. As you can see here, our environment is pretty well lit with the spotlights that we created, and everything is just beautiful. As you can see here, I can shoot as normal. We have our weapon here, and we're gonna go ahead and add post-processing effects to our weapon next. So let's go ahead and look at what we've done. So if I click on my main camera, let's go ahead and see the night and day picture of our post-processing effects. I'm gonna go ahead and just uncheck this box here. This is our current scene, and this is our scene after post-processing effects. So with a little amount of work, I've really added a quality touch to this game that I feel is much better, and you can see that within a matter of 8 minutes, the quality that you can create with post-processing effects. Now imagine spending an hour perfecting this and how amazing your title would look. So let's go ahead and create a post-processing file for our weapon. So if you click on your game, let's create another post-processing, right-click game, create, post-processing file, and call this weapon underscore post-processing file, PPF. Let's click on our weapon cam. Let's add a component, post-processing file, and drag your weapon post-processing file on it. Select your weapon post-processing file, and what we're going to do is we're going to do some bloom on this. So click on the bloom, and you'll see instantly that our gun glow is insanely just blurred out in front of us, right? That's what we want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the intensity, I'm going to decrease it to about 0.3, and the threshold, I'm going to bring that up a bit. And you'll see here that we can now control the intensity of this guy. So I do want the glare on it because it kind of just makes it look like a cool sci-fi weapon. And I can increase the intensity here, just very subtle. And we'll increase the gamma. And I think I'm happy with that. You can see here that just with a little bit of effort, we've managed to turn this gun into a much better looking weapon. I don't think there's anything else I really want to add to this. We can mess around with color grading to see how that affects our weapon, although it is affecting the environment, which I don't like. But let's see here what happens if I turn this into a cinematic thing. Yeah, so if I do filmic here, you can see here that now the weapon, right, the weapon crease there looks insanely cool. However, though, it is affecting my actual environment, how I'm looking through this camera right now, and I do not like that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn color grading off, and we're going to keep the bloom settings. And last but not least, I want to select my sci-fi post-processing file, and I think I do want to add, I want to click on my sun a bit. And I think I want to add a bit more lighting to our environment, just increase the intensity. So if I go to my sun inside my market, under lights, my sunlight, I can increase the intensity a bit. And there we go. So about a 1, maybe a 0, whoops, maybe a 0.8. Yeah, I'm happy with that. All right, guys, we have successfully converted this project into a beautiful work of art. And just to show you the night and day difference again, I will go ahead here. I'm going to shut my main camera post-processing file off. And we went from this to a much more game dev scenic area.